right, I'm going to go ahead and call this work session to order on the Angel Fund. Let's start with introductions on this side.
Forrest Dunbar.
Meg Salazar. Crystal Kennedy.
John Middleton.
Felix Rivera.
Joe Morrison.
Aaron Bonta.
Pete Peterson, so.
Fred Dyson.
All right. So this was an item that at some previous meeting, perhaps during the budget, there was interest in having a work session on. So that's why we're here. Turn it over to you.
So I'm going to start.
Oh, sure. Mr.
Mr.
Slipka.
Chair, Alex Slipka, Chief Fiscal Officer. I want to start really by thanking the Assembly for their vision 7 years ago in 2012 when you unanimously approved this, which was a statewide, federal initiative to provide entrepreneurial capital to people who do not otherwise have access to entrepreneurial capital. And Joe and Aaron are going to walk through with you the history of it from going forward. But without your vision, we wouldn't be here today. So thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, CFO Slipka. And I think I'm in the right thing. I click in this area. Thanks to the Anchorage Assembly for having us. We really appreciate it. Briefly covering our mission, we're an evergreen fund that does three things. One, we put capital into this market for businesses that are headquartered in with significant operations in, or which potentially significant economic benefit to Anchorage with an entrepreneurial focus. Two, we strengthen Alaska's risk capital and entrepreneurial ecosystem. We'll talk about that a little bit today. We want this to be rich ground and soil for entrepreneurs to grow companies in here in Alaska. And of course, we also work with early stage and disadvantaged businesses to help them grow. Before we move on, I think we have some of our advisory committee members here. And if it's all right with the Assembly through Chair Rivera, we'd like to ask if they could introduce themselves.
Hi, Stephen Trimble. Oh, hi, Stephen Trimble, Advisory Committee member.
What do you do?
I have a company called Arctic Solar Ventures.
Hi, Kevin Groen, Advisory Committee member and a general partner at a venture capital firm based in Seattle called 9 Mile Labs. Invested in over 100 early stage startups. So, thank you.
My name is Thomas Holder. I'm also a member of the Advisory Council. I've got a roughly 30-year background in high-tech and venture investing.
Christy Bell, I'm also an advisory member, and I lead the Business and Enterprise Institute at the University of Alaska.
And I'm Bill Papa, President and CEO of the Anchorage Economic Development Corporation. I've been in business for about 46 years in varying forms, and I am co-chair with Tom of the Business Advisory Board.
Great. So the framework that we're operating with today is to talk a little bit about where we've been, where we are now, and where we see ourselves going to serve the community of Anchorage and, of course, the municipality. So going through yesterday, we'll define what it is we do. 49 State Angel Fund is something of a complicated animal financially, so we'll talk about that. We'll also go through our 7 years of history here operating out of the city. Then talking about today, we'll cover the programs that we've built, some of the investments we've made. You've heard mostly about the team. We'll kind of just talk about why the overall team composition is really important. We'll talk about some of our quantitative and our qualitative wins. Finally, we'll also close with a discussion of our strategic roadmap that takes us through year-end 2021. Close it out and look forward to a great discussion with our Assembly. Thank you so much for having us. So, what is the 49th State Angel Fund? It is a $12.7 million equity fund of funds. So we don't go out and invest. What we do is we go out and we find talented private sector managers or potentially talented private sector managers. We work with them to pool our capital with private sector capital to create an investment fund that will then go out and make investments. Again, our mission, in parentheses, deploy capital in the market, strengthen the entrepreneurial ecosystem, help startups, right? Founded in 2012, unanimous approval from the Anchorage Assembly, and funded by two streams. Originally, we were funded entirely through United States Treasury's State Small Business Credit Initiative, which was an offshoot of the Jobs Act. And today, we are funded by the returns of our fund. We're funded by the returns of principal and income on the investments we've made, as well as interest income on our fund deposit. So that is part of the nuts and bolts of what we are. And this is just a look at the business model. So any investment that we create takes a public dollar, matches it with a private dollar up front, 100% of the time. It goes into generally a pool that a third-party fund manages. Our smallest one might be $25,000 a year. Our largest one might be $4.25 million. And that would be our commitment. That fund then goes out and makes a variety of investments. Those investments also gain additional private capital out in the community. It's not just this fund that is funding that, so additional investment occurs, and then in startups and in entrepreneurship, we know that it's a high-risk endeavor. We know that 30% of all startups fail, 50% return less than their invested capital, but the good news is some do well, and they return capital to their investors.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Mr. Wells.
So you put in $1, then some private company puts in $1, and you're one of these investment 1, 2, 3s?
No, we're here, we're the public investor.
Okay.
And so we help create this investment fund. This investment fund is managed by a third-party private sector manager. They will go out and do at least 5 transactions. Some will do more. And then those transactions will again secure additional private capital. You know, they're building a mountain biking company. It needs more money. Some of those will be successful, and they'll pay back the investors.
Okay, so you just started off, and you say, but before you can spend this money, you have to go get these additional investors, and then...
Yes, before we invest, we lever the public dollar with the dollar of private sector investment. So the returns pay for our operations. They also pay for the opportunity to reinvest. And later on, we'll talk about some of the new funds we've created with capital that has returned to the city. So, but before we do that, let's talk about our history and kind of the 3 phases of our program. The first phase was our founding. And 2012 to 2014, I think this allocation became available in 2012. And really, we were talking with the private sector about what can we do to support entrepreneurship in Alaska. And it took years to convince the private sector to run funds sort of for the benefit of the community returns and the financial returns, and kind of create this community chess play. So we created our first 4 investment funds in the first few years of the program. And then, like any new company or endeavor, we contacted the market. And we found that this wasn't easy. There wasn't a lot of entrepreneurial activity that we saw. Certainly the entrepreneurial ecosystem wasn't as big a couple years ago. And naturally, it was hard for our investors to invest their capital. So that was 2015, and yet we saw some initial successes. We started seeing returns in 2016. So market contact, a little bit challenging to get the capital out, but we did see some returns in 2016. And then in 2017, a couple things happened. One was that we really focused on capital deployment of our funds, and talked about the need to get the capital out, and that was difficult for our community to hear. A focus on deployment sort of created some turbulence that the 49th State Angel Fund had to weather, but we needed to see this capital deployed to benefit Alaska's entrepreneurs. 2018, we started seeing better results, and of course the community sentiment improved. We're a small community, everybody knows everybody, often in Alaska, and recently we've built new investment funds. We've hired a wonderful associate after 7 years, and we've created some really significant programs that benefit our community. So, defining the 49th State Angel Fund a little more, it's important to really recognize, and I think that this is something that our entrepreneurial ecosystem needs to take to heart, is that outcomes matter. And this is why this matters, this is why this work matters. According to the University of Alaska Center for Economic Development, 4,000 to 6,000 new jobs every year, most net new job growth in Alaska, follows the national pattern. New companies created, right? Mature companies find ways to optimize, increase results from employees, minimize costs, but new companies need to grow, and that benefits our state. But we know this is hard. We know that the first few years of an investment activity like this are met with your initial losses and seeing challenges, and it takes time for the results to show. So this is just a typical venture capital J curve showing that after 6 years you're starting to see success, and that's where we sit now. 2 notes that I'll make. The first is that we built this fund to be a permanent function of the municipality of Anchorage. We built it to show success, recycle its capital, and to continue to invest in our community, delivering ongoing value. The other thing is that we've tried to do this a couple times in our state's history. In the 1990s, we had something called the Alaska Science and Technology Foundation. It was destroyed when we had an economic downturn. In the early 2000s, we had something called Alaska InvestNet. I think there was a congressional allocation that occurred allowing for investments into startups here in Alaska. It expended its capital, it's gone. So when we started the 49th State Angel Fund, none of this was here, and there really wasn't a lot of activity in this space. So I'm going to turn things over to my associate Aaron to talk about some of the new programs that we've been developing for the community.
Yeah, so one aspect of our job is continuing to touch base with thought leaders across the country to put together programs that support founders and what we call ecosystem builders or economic developers. So we have been focused on lowering barriers to entry and increasing access. And that presents itself in a couple of different ways. The first one is the $10 lunch. One thing we've heard across the country is that having a beer after work is super tough for a lot of entrepreneurs, especially parents. So we put together this, we partnered with Alaska Investor Network to put on the $10 lunch. They pay any catering overage, and our attendees pay $10. They show up, they have lunch. They meet a high quality and a high number of investors, and so far we've had about 30 people show up to the last 2. So this will be happening quarterly. The next one is the All Call. This one is geared more towards ecosystem builders and economic developers, where quarterly we get on the phone via Zoom and we just talk about all of the programs and events and things we want people to be aware of. We hope that this provides some cross-pollination of ideas, some stronger coordination between groups so that we don't kind of conflict on event nights or, just so we can coordinate better across the statewide ecosystem. And then next is Pitch Fest. This year was our 2nd year putting it on in conjunction with the Accelerate Alaska Conference. So about 10 or so entrepreneurs come and pitch their business idea, whether it's new or whether they're providing updates or growth, etc. So there are prizes at the end of Pitch Fest. This year we partnered with Alaska Growth Capital. They provided $500 to the winners, and then Beacon Media provided $1,500 in media services for the winners. And then Alaska Angel Conference, Kevin Croy brought this to our organization. It's been, so last year, in 2018, we started working on the 2019 Angel Conference, where we bring together new and inexperienced or curious investors, and they build a fund over 12 weeks. And there's a series of, leading up to this 12 weeks of fund building, there's 3 months of workshops that are free to attend and are statewide. They're held via Zoom. So we increase education, and our goal is to diversify and broaden the investor landscape throughout the entire state of Alaska. So Anchorage was the first host, 49 SAF, providing most of the operational and the thinking behind it, with Kevin Croy volunteering heavily on this effort. So in May 2019, we made a $115,000 investment in the winning company. Because on the other side of the fund building, 20 or more entrepreneurs are pitching and competing for the final fund. So we made that investment, and then that culminated in a total of almost $250,000 of investment, because some of those new investors who have gone through the process continue to invest in other companies throughout in the state.
And all that I'll note for an 11,000 contribution on our side of the investment. So $250,000 total financial impact, $11,000 was what we invested. In addition to significant program support. Talking about the portfolio just a little bit, $7.4 million has gone into 31 companies. I'll show you the investment funds that have done that in a moment. We have $5.3 million that is in fund structures awaiting deployment, right? So the fund managers are making as prudent decisions as they can in this difficult market to invest in local companies on the equity side. That is our federal allocation, $12.744 million. Abundantly, fully obligated, it's either in companies or it's in fund structures waiting to go into companies. The good news, the exciting news is $1.68 million of returns. This is just under 23% of what we've deployed, 13% of the fund overall, and really just a couple years after operations have started in terms of investing. So that's a very promising sign. And these are the funds that have done the hard work. The Anchorage Opportunity Fund is run by John Rubini, Mark Kroloff, and Jimmy Miner, a trio of local businessmen affiliated with JL Properties and other organizations. The Alaska Accelerator Fund, which was our state's first angel investing group, founded in 2014, did 10 different transactions into startup companies. Anchorage Equity Partners, which is downstream from that, making larger investments. The 49th Fund, also downstream from that, making larger investments. Launch Alaska, our state's first startup accelerator. And following on the initial success of Anchorage Opportunity Fund 1, in 2019 we closed Anchorage Opportunity Fund 2, a new $3 million fund that will deploy capital into the Anchorage economy. As for our returns, we've taken some of it and helped create that financial impact. Aaron talked about the total $115,000 financial impact of the Alaska Angel Conference, which did generate an additional investment we didn't foresee. The Alaska Seed Fund, we matched money with Wells Fargo. That money went into 10 local startups across Alaska. And the Set Up Shop initiative. I like to think that we were instrumental both in helping seed some of the thought leadership and have conversations with people like Mahalo Tamale from Minnesota and Twin Cities Neighborhood Development Centers, interfacing with the ACLT. We've invested in their fund that will invest in Mountain View and diverse entrepreneurs. So this is the same look at that capital, but I'm going to go a little bit more into the returns and what that looks like and how it can help fuel our program. $1.682 million of returns as discussed. The funds on deposit have been carefully managed and carefully invested in low-risk securities like treasuries. So we are sitting on $385,000 of program income, interest income. We have reinvested, we have commitments of $261,000. We have expended over 3 years just over $500,000 on program operations. And under the guidance of the CFO, he has advised us to keep a 3-year operating reserve on hand. That puts us just over $1.1 million. So at minimum, without any additional returns, which are incredibly difficult to forecast, we're still kind of coming out of the early part of that curve. We intend to invest another $163,000 into the local economy and helping create multiples of private sector investment as well. We track key performance indicators on a bi-monthly basis with our advisory committee that's here. One of them is simply, are we putting capital out into the market? $7.4 million has been invested as discussed. We try to see deployment of $1 to $2 million every year, prudent management. We also track our diversification. If you look at the 31 companies in our portfolio, really it's kind of 10 equal-sized chunks. So we're about diversified to the tune of 10 different investments. And then we track 3 other things, but I want to go into these more in depth in a bit because I think these are some of our strong qualitative lens. We track the economic benefit. What kind of private sector stimulus and investment are we encouraging? We track job creation. And of course, we also track our returns. I guess we already covered that. But I'll turn things over to Aaron to talk about the team and why the composition is important.
Well, I think to start, Joe and myself. So, yeah, I'm the newest and only employee that's been hired in 7 years. Happy to be here. And quite astounded, actually. We have a very engaged and involved advisory committee, as you can see, because most of them are here. So I was planning on introducing them, but they don't have to since they are here. But the other folks who I'd like to mention are Michael Frederick. She's the president of SALT, which is an art design firm just across the parking lot here. Lydia Griffey, she also sits on the board of ACDA, and she is a senior principal at Stantec. Dan Newman, he's heavily involved in the Anchorage Chamber of Commerce, and is the founder and president of Alaska Premier Auctions. And everyone else is here, but they are consistently engaged with our fund, providing support, advice, not just our meetings every month, but they are on hand at all times, and so we're very lucky to have their expertise to draw from.
And so I'll cover the quantitative wins. Aaron will cover some of the qualitative ones. Before us, there weren't 9 investment funds. There wasn't an angel investments fund structure within the state of Alaska within probably 20 years. And they operate across the early stage, largely of the capital continuum. Because we're operating earlier than most people are comfortable with, that's why we're generating such additional strong private leverage, right? We're helping transactions occur. And they all do different things. They're everything from microfinance to helping commercialize initial companies to significant growth equity for more mature firms. $50 million impact on the private sector side. This is the number one thing about our program that's remarkable. We track not only the initial dollar for dollar investment, but every year we talk to our fund managers. What is the additional debt and equity in your portfolio? Right now, for every dollar we invest, nearly $7.20 is invested in the community. That gives us a $50 million plus impact of our operations across 7 years. 140 jobs, similarly, data coming back from fund managers. We ask them to give us the FTEs of their portfolio at the beginning of every year. And finally, again, exceeding expectations, $1.68 million in returns at this stage of the life cycle. We're excited about all of this, and we think it's really remarkable. And we think it's really remarkable for a community like Anchorage that's far away from the rest of the United States.
So we can talk about the economic and the financial returns, but one of the most important aspects of our job is the community returns. And so when we talk about who we're really working for, it's the founders. And I know many of you in this room are probably familiar with Pepper Foster Wilder. She founded 60 Hertz a few years ago, actually at a startup weekend, pitched the idea, and has now carried it through to international recognition. She wins pitch competitions across the world. I just watched her present to a group from Norway, the Resource Development Council, and everybody knew her from Norway. She exemplifies who we continue to support and want to find funding so that she can see her vision to success.
And so this is an example of an ecosystem stakeholder model. It comes from MIT, but at the center of it you have the entrepreneur. To the right of that you have the risk capital and funding mechanism. That's us, and we're the government. So we're covering kind of 2 out of 5 spots here. The university and the programs that they run, more and more involved, especially thanks to Christabel, one of our advisory committee members, and corporate support. And of course we've got people like Lydia from Stantec and Tom from, I think it's North Star Wind these days? Northwind, even, formerly of Siri. So we're doing the best we can to replicate that model, but here's the other part of the win. All of this stuff that you see here, a lot of it didn't exist before the 49th State Angel Fund. It just didn't. When we started operations, there was virtually nothing. Now, there are some logos that are there and would stay there, but the focus on entrepreneurship across this state, this fund has helped spark. And after 7 years, being able to kind of stay with that initial challenge of deploying that capital, I think we've really got something that's very powerful for the community. And if any of you made it out to an Alaska Startup Week event this week, thank you. It means a lot to the people of our community to see you there supporting them. But there's a lot of focus in this space so that Alaska can create companies for its own future. I'll turn things over to Aaron again.
So it was this year, we brought our advisory committee together for a full day strategy session. We were incredibly grateful for their time. But we put together a 3-year roadmap to discuss, to figure out how we can better and continually serve our community. And what we came up with was this year we are working with someone to put together an ecosystem analysis. We want to identify key infrastructure that other cities have across the nation and figure out maybe some areas that we can provide support or figure out what we're doing really well so that we can be better at that going forward. And then we're going to take this infrastructure analysis and build upon it a stronger, inclusive entrepreneurship effort. It's almost like we're in the enlightenment stage, so we work closely with the Kauffman Foundation and follow them. And so inclusive entrepreneurship is more than just a buzzword. It's something we're seeking with every single one of our programs. So we want to include all of Anchorage and ensure that it continues to diversify. And then in 2021, once we've rolled up the inclusive entrepreneurship efforts into the infrastructure analysis, we'll work on founder development. So education, access to resources, somebody has a brilliant idea and taking that next step into launching that into an actual business, it's terrifying, it's overwhelming. And there are a lot of educational tools out there, but we want to help our founders and answer their needs. So by 2021, we'll develop together to support our founders more comprehensively.
So Erin's in the driver's seat on all these activities. My strategic focus is trying to identify how we can continue our work and potentially find new sources of capital to deploy. Most importantly, sources of capital that continue to fuel activity and that are some sort of income generating opportunity for the city. This is a difficult thing to accomplish. And as we discussed, that J-curve, venture investing is very volatile. So we're trying to look at new structures and new development finance efforts that will provide returns to the city, allow us to continue our work and potentially expand it. That's going to take a really long time. It takes 1 to 2 years to build any kind of investment fund. And we're just starting to zero in on the potential kinds of investment funds that might work for all of us. And then we still have to maintain our core activities, that is, invest in the community, see the capital deployed, host quarterly and annual programs for the benefit of the community, and partner with others. And I think that's one thing that we've learned in the last few years is we're more successful when we work with the university, when we work with the Alaska Investors Network, when we work with Alaska Growth Capital. We're more successful in just kind of extending our reach. So we'll look to do more of that. And in closing, not only are we adding you to the email list, not only can we thank you so much for your support over the years, which we really appreciate. We have a tradition, and the tradition is Punahusky. Punahusky shows up on all our slides, so forgive me for that. Thank you very much for supporting us, and we look forward to discussing the fund with you.
Right. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Dunbar.
I have a question. So one industry that we regulate very closely, and it's one of the few industries that's really growing in this city and state, is cannabis. And I was wondering if you have a fund that invests in cannabis businesses.
No, is the answer. Initially, alcohol, cannabis, firearms were things that we stayed away from.
Is there any legal prohibition from you guys doing that, or just a policy, just choice?
Potentially on the federal side, quite probably. So with the federal capital,
Definitively, yes.
Definitively,
yeah,
yes.
with federal capital, that would be difficult to do.
Right, because the initial capital was federal.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Thank you. Mr. Whittleton?
What we're all dying to know is, give us a list of the businesses in Anchorage that are getting money through you.
Well, that we own a part of. You own a part of.
We all own a part of it. So I think one of the easiest ways to do that is to talk about the fund. So our policy is we let the fund managers disclose whatever they want, and we disclose what we've invested in a fund manager. So it's public knowledge that the Anchorage Opportunity Fund invested in the Dome, that occurred, and that helped that asset get rebuilt in our community. It's public knowledge that Launch Alaska has invested in 60 hertz microgrids, and we saw Piper. Off the top of my head, all 31 transactions would take me some time. I can't do it immediately. And also, the confidentiality provisions of this fund were passed by the Anchorage Assembly. So if we want to talk about it, we certainly can. And I can kind of Google what's public while I sit here, but my brain's a little slow.
I think what he's getting at is, do we own any piece of Wild Scoops? It's really the...
I'm afraid I can't answer that.
No, but Heather's choice. I can answer that.
It's also, yes, it's also common
public
knowledge that
knowledge.
we've invested in Heather's choice.
Cool.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Bill Pop.
Mr. Chair, wanted to just comment on one element of Assemblymember Weddleton's question. None of the money has been handed to anybody. It has gone through an incredibly painful, long, protracted due diligence process in terms of the fund investments that the staff of the 49th State Angel Fund has gone through, and that the funds themselves also go through an incredible amount of work to identify businesses that are worthy for the investment. And Joe, I would say I'm not, and to my fellow members of the committee who've all been advising and bearing witness to this whole process that we've been going through for the last 7 years, dozens and dozens of pitches have been made for one investment actually being deployed. So I want to be real clear, because there's a misperception in some circles that this is some form of grant. It's not. It's done under the most strictest of business principles in terms of how funds are invested.
Follow up on it. I think the fact that you're only about 60% invested shows that you must be fairly risk averse.
I think that there's a couple things happening there. I think one, that governmental capital comes with strings, and we have some strings, and that is less attractive for the private sector. I think, quite honestly, I think that the founder activity wasn't as strong or significant when we started, and it's taken time. You have to build all of this, not just the investing part. It all kind of has to come up together.
Thank you. Ms. Salaton.
Thank you. So, do you look to you're looking for community impact, but the metrics you're using as jobs, return on investment, and I forget the other one. I apologize. How does social entrepreneurship play into this? Because we have businesses built around a model of social giving that may not meet some of your other factors, or is that just not something you guys are interested with your investment parameters?
So we have a blended economic development and financial return focus. We have invested, and I think our activity was key in helping get the Set Up Shop Fund spun up. And we were conscious of that need within our community. So that is where that was the way I'd respond is we've helped create, I think, one of the most functional microfinance funds in Alaska. So that's an aspect of social entrepreneurship and reaching diverse communities. But we expect a return on our dollar. Now, we recognize that a return on our dollar also comes with an economic and community benefit, and we're working real hard to return the entire fund. This is very difficult to do, and governmental funds typically struggle in this space. So we're aiming to be in the top 5-10%.
With regard to Set Up Shop, how do you intend to return on your investment? Like, can you tell me a little bit more about that when you say that? I don't understand, because I understand Set Up Shop, but maybe a few more steps along the way.
We made an investment into the fund at a very low, remarkably low interest rate, lower than probably most costs of capital. And we made that investment, and over time, they need to pay that investment back to the city.
They being the community
Set Up
land
Shop.
trust?
Yeah.
Can you tell us what Set Up Shop is?
I'm sorry. I'll let you take Set Up Shop.
Sure. So it's spun out, not spun out, but it's a program, it's almost a small business accelerator program put together by the Anchorage Community Land Trust. So they have a variety, they're focused on neighborhood specific entrepreneurs, so Spinard, Mountain And one of their last cohorts was focused on food-related businesses. They partook in our Startup Week event, so we heard a number of pitches from some of their most recent graduates, one of which actually is partnered with Alaska Growth Capital, so they focus on Alaska Native entrepreneurs here in Anchorage as well. So it's not, massive growth targeting companies, but really the fundamentals of business basic.
You jogged my memory. I went to one of the things.
Thank you. So I had one question, and then Mr. Peterson. So in 2020, when you outlined the plan, the term that you used was inclusive entrepreneurship. Could you define that?
Sure. Anchorage itself as a city is one of the most diverse, it's one of the most diverse cities in the country. So we there are a number of underserved neighborhoods in our community, and we hope to lower the barrier for entry for folks who live in these underserved neighborhoods. So that means increasing access and awareness from some of our investor communities, because we have direct access to our investors. And it's also a learning process, because we're sort of in an enlightened stage of entrepreneurship where a lot of resources from the Kauffman Foundation and other national organizations are really starting to just learn what inclusive means and how to really integrate that into our ecosystem building efforts.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so these entrepreneurs, how much of their own capital are they required to invest to secure entry into this program? Is there a minimum percentage, or?
Some of them have nothing, so that is, then they invest nothing. But sometimes the fund manager says, when they encounter an entrepreneur, it means, well, we can't do this transaction unless, you're willing to risk some of your own personal capital. And that happens fairly frequently. We see often transactions delayed, things not occur because they're trying to continue to get buy-in from all parties. So to answer your question, definitely entrepreneurs put skin in the game when they can.
Thank you. Yeah, Ms. Salter.
Thank you. So the few that have been named have been kind of product-based investment companies. Do you have service-based investments as well? Businesses that aren't producing a thing but are doing something instead of value?
I'm processing that. I'm not sure, and I need to think about it. The adage is people don't scale. So it's really hard for venture functions and equity functions to invest in service businesses. It's not that they don't make money or they won't do well. They won't do remarkably well. Some of them will. But sort of the conventional wisdom is often find a product, bring it to scale, send it to a big market, grow your company, create jobs. It's just harder in service. It doesn't mean it's impossible.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Given the economic environment, has that affected the level of interest in the program? And then also, could you speak to the selection process? I know it's not a grant. What are you looking for in general? How do you make those determinations?
Certainly. So we have selection process. Can somebody? I'm sorry.
Economic environment, if there's any impact in interest level in the program?
It's interesting. We thought that there would be a chilling effect during some parts of the recession. And I think at the initial part of the recession when it hit, certainly there was. And it was kind of that 2015-16 period where things were a little rocky. 2017, we saw a lot of deployment. 2018 as well. So that was positive. In terms of selection process, this is really a lot of best practice, angel capital association, venture investing stuff that the fund managers are using. So, and I think that one thing we shouldn't lose track of is this is still really difficult. This is still Alaska. This isn't Seattle. This isn't Bend, Oregon. This isn't Portland. it's harder for investors who are seeking that financial return to step forward and put that dollar out. So they're asking a lot of tough questions. And going back to Mr. Peterson's comment, some of it is, if it's not financial skin in the game, what's your personal skin in the game? Have you left your job? Are you willing to leave your job? Are you willing to leave your job for a lower salary if we fund that salary? Those kinds of things.
Follow.
Okay.
What kind of outreach do you have to potential private investors?
Well, I think that's actually our strongest stakeholder group. It has historically, we started with high net worth individuals, which is the world of angel investing. Slowly, we engaged some of the Alaska Native corporations. Slowly, we engaged some corporations in other spaces. But that's been tough because this is risk capital, and until the business model's proven, I think investors are going to be somewhat skeptical to get involved in the space. Now, 3-4 years ago, again, when all this ecosystem wasn't here, this was a much harder conversation to have. It's easier now. It's easier when Startup Week is in Channel 2 and KTVA. It's a lot easier now that time has passed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar?
Yeah, I was curious about the sort of scalability of the fund itself. So let's say that the economy does heat up and you guys start doing very well, start getting a lot more return on investment. How is it structured? Do you hire more staff? At some point, does it pay a dividend to the city? Does it always reinvest in itself? Like, what does it look like if it does grow significantly?
At this exact moment, it's a 3-year operating reserve with anything above the 3-year operating reserve targeted for community reinvestment and operated under the guidance of the CFO, myself, and the mayor. We would love nothing more than to have this opportunity. I think that having a function like this at City Hall is period. Having a function like this at City Hall is very unique.
Yeah.
There were only a handful of other municipalities that did this, and I believe we're probably the most successful. The potential to create other financial operations is something that could be of value to our city, I think.
So try to interpret what you just said. So you have one full-time employee now?
Well, there's me and Aaron.
Oh, okay, so you're both.
Yeah.
Okay. I was a little confused if you were working somewhere else and kind of half volunteering for us, but you also are full-time employees.
I'm an FTE, yeah.
And your salaries come out of this fund or come out of general fund?
They come out of the Anchorage Angel Evergreen Fund.
Okay.
Direct financial support has been very small from the city.
Good. I mean, from our perspective, good. So
borderline, I'm not sure it's 0, but it's close.
Good. So yeah, but I guess then perhaps if it did get, is it the kind of thing that you would need another full-time employee if it got larger, or is it the kind of thing that could scale a lot without any more staff?
I think it depends on that whole Fund 2 discussion that we were having. It depends on the kind of business model that we pursue and the capital that's available and how we draw that down in fees. But I think that there's really a lot of unique things that we could do because we're here. And I think there's a lot of promise.
So you said that the CFO.
Yeah, I was going to expand on some of those things. The real focus, from the office is it's not there to pay a dividend to the municipality. It's purely there to provide the economic impacts that you're seeing. And as it grows, those impacts become greater. We have no interest in hiring a whole bunch of people to run it. I mean, the outsourced aspect of it works great. We get more money. We hire more managers to do the actual investing work. With the whole idea of the more capital you have available, the more business opportunity there is. And that's kind of the vision we're rolling with. We're not trying to build any kind of large entity. We're just trying to be a source of capital to support economic development broadly.
Okay, I have one more question. So and this is a much smaller scale, but the permanent fund has a variety of protections, and it's explicitly separated from the rest of government. I mean, it isn't. There's no equivalent like the governor being involved the way the mayor is here, and that's obviously so that politics doesn't get involved. What is the influence of the CFO or the mayor if they're saying, like, for example, we want to develop the archive property, And a small business is like, well, we want to help develop the archive property too. Can they help steer the angel fund towards that?
So I think that potentially, that potential exists. We've bridged two administrations. We've bridged the Sullivan administration where we were founded, the Berkowitz administration. I have not experienced anything in that realm. I think it's always worth thinking, and I think even the permanent fund is subject to some of this. It's always worth thinking about how, when you're in a political environment, you're trying to make financial decisions, how that evolves, right? But there have been no problems thus far.
And I guess I would expand on that, it's, when we're talking about the outsourced model, we really delegated the investment decision to these managers, and our oversight is, did you follow your due diligence process? So we're not going to say, gee, Forrest, you should go out and invest in this. You're going to come to us and say, well, I found this investment, and there was, I won't go into the details, but there was an investment where we made them do a lot of extra work before we let them proceed. And very specifically to the archives, that just couldn't be, because the way this structures, it's a one-for-one, $1 for us with $1 of private capital would be the way it would work. And so it would have, it's just very unlikely that would be the case.
Thank you. All right, I don't see any other questions. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and please, if you get an opportunity to check in with any of the entrepreneurs, we're going to add you all to our email list. Your words of encouragement mean a lot to the people of this community. Thank you.
In fact, tomorrow there's a diversity and inclusive business luncheon panel to close out our startup weekend, the Mountain View Boys and Girls Club. So,
What time?
12 to 2.
Do we buy a ticket or can we just show up?
I have one ticket.
No, it's fine.
No, I do.
We'll cover you.
No, I'll buy a ticket. I'm just curious.
No, they're $5 if you want to eat,
Oh.
but she just wants to make sure she has a seat. That's all.
That's a screaming deal.
All right. Oh, we're getting to